Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome back Wednesday.
Oh.
Back to Tissue Talk.
Has it been a week already?
It has been a week.
Wow.
I know. We'll see if anybody jumps on. We'll wait for a hot second. Maybe not, maybe so, but we got coffee and we're happy about that. And it's 12:30 and it's Wednesday. I know you guys might not know it's Wednesday, but it actually is Wednesday still.
Welcome.
So today, episode 3, we made it to episode 3.
Awesome.
Feels like episode 4 already. Okay, so today we are going to talk about pains in the neck.
Pain.
Why do we have pain in our neck and our upper back and our shoulders, right? We're doing a lot of sitting these days. A lot. Make at home makeshift desks, makeshift offices. We got kids on the dining room table in school, and we're doing a lot of sitting where we're not really that comfortable. So we want to talk about how to get postural correction for forward head and shoulders.
I think we're sitting and we're getting a little too comfortable sitting is what's happening.
Yeah, well, I think we're trying to sit and be comfortable and sit and be comfortable at the same time and do work, which you just can't do. So what we're going to do today is we are going to talk about why is there pain in your neck and shoulders and how to get rid of it. So first we want to address movement versus lack of movement, because movement is something that we really should be doing and lack of movement is something that we are doing right now.
What does movement do?
Okay, so movement, it keeps us loose, right? That's the whole point of movement, is it lubricates the whole system. It sends mobility messages to the nervous system. Right. So it's constantly talking to your central nervous system, to your peripheral nervous system. Like, hey, I want to move my arm. Okay, go ahead and move your arm. So it's doing that, and then it helps with collagen replacement, which is something we really need, especially as we age. It keeps the elasticity in our joints and in our tissues. So it keeps us able to move and then extend and contract again.
Now,
right?
what about lack of movement?
So lack of movement,
which is sitting like we're doing right now.
Yeah, lack of movement is basically where we're doing nothing or we're stuck in one position for a long period of time. And what that does is it causes a buildup of really tough protein in your fascia. And the fascia is something, it's like, it's not even saran wrap, but it's this whole like system of soft tissue that envelops and wraps every single muscle fiber, every muscle bundle, every muscle, every part. Yeah, everywhere. Yep. And honestly, muscles can't contract without fascia. That's its support system. So what happens is it causes a huge buildup of really tough protein in the fascia. And then from there, you lose your ability to contract and relax. You lose what's called your extensibility, which means that your elasticity is where you can contract. Your extensibility is where you can actually go back to the same position. So if you lose your extensibility, then you're basically stuck like this. So that's what happens from a lot of lack of movement.
An example of this is when I sit down at the computer, which I don't do pretty much at all, is I sit for 10 minutes. As soon as I get back up, I feel like I am 105 years old. Yeah. Everything's still in the bent position, and it takes me a while to finally straighten up. That creakiness itself is that lack of extensibility. Yeah. And it only takes days. It only takes days to change your tissue, you guys, to make big changes in your tissue. Days. That's why this whole like over and over and over again of sitting in the same position is killing us, literally. And you can change from supple to form-fitting to shrunken and restrictive in a matter of days. So today we're going to talk about how do we get out of that, because we don't want people to come out of this position or out of situation like just jacked up beyond belief and not be able to get back into their normal suppleness. So we're going to start by talking about like long and short muscles and tight muscles, because you can have long muscles and be tight and short muscles and be tight. Well, your body doesn't know the difference between whether it's a long muscle or whether it's short. It just knows tight. And what we're going to do, we're going to try to show you the difference between the two and then how to get out of that.
Right. So tight muscles, it's really the imbalance between like your muscle and your fascia, right? Because your fascia, again, it holds the muscle fiber in there. So without fascia, your muscle fibers, they don't have a support system and they wouldn't be able to contract and relax and really do that contractile function that we do. So tight muscles can either have a shortened or stretched out resting length. So they can either be stuck in a short position or they could be stuck in a long position. We have different resting lengths of both. They can become fibrous, inelastic, and ischemic, which means there's a limited blood flow. So if we're doing a lot of sitting and we're kind of stuck in this stretched out position, let's use our chest, our pecs and our back, our rhomboids and mid-trap for the example. So if I'm sitting like this and I'm working like this all day long, my chest and my pecs, my chest and my pecs are very shortened, and my rhomboids and my mid-trap are elongated and more ischemic. And the ischemic means that they're just not getting that blood flow that's needed. So what's happening is, when one muscle is tight, the other muscle is tight and elongated. So we will feel the sense of tightness back here, but it's actually the tightness up here that is the tight and short muscle that's creating a very tight and elongated muscle back here.
Absolutely.
So it's really muscle imbalance is super counterintuitive, because we tend to want to rub the spot that hurts back here, and it's usually up here, or it's hypertonic and it's moving too much and it's getting too much contractile property, but it's not letting go up in your upper trap. So we're going to go through all of that today. So when it's short, so we have a shortened muscle right here, like in our pec. That's the front of our shoulder. That's what pulls everything forward. That's because we're sitting like this, like this, like this, right? Hi, Kathleen. Welcome. I'm so glad that you're watching. So it's called adaptive shortening, right? Because the muscle begins to adapt to whatever position we put it in. And so what'll happen is the muscle tissue redesigns its own length. And it does that by, it reduces its number of sarcomeres. And your sarcomeres is your base unit of contraction. It's where the muscle contraction actually starts. And so it reduces its number of sarcomeres and fascia, and then it accommodates it. So what'll happen is we become a shrinky dink.
Yeah.
Everything gets like shrink wrapped, and we tighten up, and then everything around us shrinks up, and then we're like, okay, I guess we're stuck here. So your body starts to adapt, and then it doesn't know any different.
It starts to take on that shape that you're demanding on it.
Right.
Whether that might be whether good or bad, it can start to take on that
and
shape.
you still have this crazy sensation of tightness, which is then what you're doing is now you want to stretch even more because you feel so tight back here, but it's really up here. So then we start to almost round ourselves over. You'll see people who are almost like their shoulders are touching each other right in the center, right? And really what that is it's because everything is hurting so bad in here, because it's giving the sensation of like, oh my God, please put me back to normal. But we're making it mean like, this really hurts. Let's stretch it more. So what'll happen is the muscle develops what's called a stretch weakness, right? And so it actually isn't strong anymore. It just feels really, really tight. And when you touch it, the muscle feels tight, but it's actually what's called a stretch weakness, because it becomes really long and exhausted.
You could be short and weak, or you could be long and weak.
Yeah.
Or both.
And then what happens then is the fascia is like, okay, I guess this is what we keep doing. And then it keeps reinforcing it and reinforcing it and reinforcing it. And so what will happen is that's where your adhesions and your knots come on. Remember, everybody's got knots. Everybody's got the knots right here, right? These are a big area. I got knots. It's not really a knot. It's because your body hasn't had any chance to get it back into a neutral and natural resting length. Your body really wants to go back to where it is. And so it doesn't know any different. And so it's adapting to that new lifestyle. Here's the crazy thing.
What's crazy?
Is that when they adapt, now they're telling the brain, this is our new normal.
This is where you're going to be now. And
so now the brain doesn't know any different. So it stops sending signals back there. Like it doesn't send the contractile signals back there. So we have these watchdogs, right? These sensory neurons and receptors that are going up into the brain to tell you like, hey, there's activity going on in the muscle. They're called your spindle cells. Hey, the joint is the muscle's trying to rip. It's called your Golgi tendon organ. And it's a receptor. And so it's a watchdog group. It's like making phone calls and being like, hey brain, somebody's trying to rip this muscle. hey brain, I need you to turn this thing on. And the brain's like, okay, I got it. And so then the brain goes down and it sends back a signal back down, and then things happen. And so when you are sitting like this for so long, or this for so long, the signal dies. You lose your whole transmission back there. And so it doesn't understand what to do anymore, because what it's getting like the SOS of tightness and tenderness, but it's because these guys are so tight and it's so bound by the fascia being so tight in there, it doesn't know how to do anything else. Hi, Paul. Welcome. So if we think about it this way, right? The muscles can't push. They can only pull. They contract.
Everything's pulling.
Right? And so it pulls everything towards its center. Like if I'm contracting, everything's coming towards the center. It's not coming just from one side to the other. It's like an accordion. Everything squishes towards the center, or a telescope. It slides in on one another, so it goes towards the center. So in order to move, a muscle will pull, right? And then it pulls the tendon, because the tendon attaches into the bone. Then the tendon is pulled, and then a bone pivots around the joint, and then the body part moves. Like, that's basic movement. So in order to create this movement, we have to assign a bunch of different parts to different things, right? Mm-hmm. So there's different roles that muscles have. And we're going to focus on two. There's like the 5 common ones, like your agonist, your antagonist, your synergist, your fixator. We're going to go into the majority of ones, which are your prime mover, which is your agonist. That's like, if I'm deciding to pick up my arm, I'm going to use my prime mover is going to be my bicep. That is my agonist. So if you have an agonist that is your prime mover, you also have an antagonist, which is the tricep, that actually has to let go.
Has to lengthen up.
It has to lengthen. Because if we have two that contract and tighten up at the same time, you won't get any movement. If an agonist antagonist contract at the same time, that's called stability.
It creates a ton of stability, but then you have a lack of mobility.
Right. And the body is amazing in a way where if you are shortening on one side, it's got to let the other side go, because the other side, everything would rip and you'd look like the Incredible Hulk all the time, but in real life skin form, instead of just turning green and ripping your stuff off.
And getting angry.
Yes.
Smash.
Hulk smash. So what does that mean for posture and pain? Because that's really what we're talking about, right? We're talking about your posture and how you're working, and why is it giving you so much doggone pain? So we have these muscles that are in the backs of our body, and they're called your postural muscles, right? And that's their job. They are, they're slow twitch muscles. Their job is to be a workhorse and to hold us up. And so they're constantly contracting. They're your neck muscles, your back muscles, your glutes, your hamstrings, your calves, like everything in the back, because we're being held up all the time. So their job is to constantly trying to fix misaligned joints, because the joints are the bones that connect together, right? That's like our shoulder joint and the joints in between our vertebrae.
Well, what is a joint? A joint is just the space between bones in our body. So that's all a joint is.
Right. And then it's got a lot of cool soft tissue that's around it, but that's more than you guys need to know today.
That's all.
We jump down that serious rabbit hole. So what we want to do is we want to talk about the forward head posture specifically, because if we're sitting on a computer, or we're looking over our phone, or we're texting, or we're doing whatever, we each have this really big giant head. And if you watched what's that movie?
Which one?
With Tom Cruise?
Which one?
He says the average head weighs 7 pounds.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember the movie. It's just Show Me the Money. I know that one. That's Show Me the Money. Anyway, the average head weighs 7 pounds. Let's say that. So if you were in perfect posture, your head is actually sitting on top of your vertebrae, your neck, your cervical vertebrae, which is actually sitting in kind of a concave fashion in order to help with impact. Because the body is made to where it kind of curves so it can help with impact and movement and control. So if we're sitting here and we're sitting a little bit forward, every inch that we move forward is another 7 pounds. So thank you, Jerry Maguire. You guys are good. I'm horrible with movies.
Usually I get it, not in a moment.
So the head is moving 1 inch forward, that's another 7 pounds. So you move 6 inches forward, which is the majority of where we're going in flexion. That's 42 pounds. That's a lot of heavy head power. And so what has to hold that up?
All those back muscles.
All those back muscles and the neck muscles, right? And so what'll happen is all of the muscles that become tight are your upper traps become really tight, your levator becomes really tight because they're shortened because everything's being pulled up and forward. And then what becomes weak are these deep, long neck flexors because you're sitting there like this, and so these don't have anything to do, and then they just shorten up and get weak. So then now, remember that fascia stuff? It's binding, and it's like it's shrink wrapping you. You're becoming a shrinky dink down here. So this is overly lengthened, and this is super tight. I mean, long and short and deep.
Yeah.
And weak. Mike, sorry, I'm talking too fast.
You get it.
And then your rhomboids, which are the muscles in the mid back right here, are super weak.
You're scratching.
They're and your low and your middle trap fibers are completely shut out as well, which is really, really important because your upper trap goes all the way up to your top of your head, and it goes out to your shoulders, and then it finishes right into your mid back. So if the only muscles that you're using are your upper fibers of that whole muscle, and you're not using anything in the middle or the lower, you're not able to control yourself and stabilize and pull yourself back down.
Right. And that tightness can lead to some of the reasons why you get some of those headaches, especially those neck tension headaches. That's coming from exactly those muscles being overlong and tight and just trying to pull back.
Yeah. And so it lines up with this thing called reciprocal inhibition. And reciprocal inhibition means when one side is contracting, the other side has to let go. You can't contract an antagonist and agonist and antagonist at the same time and have movement, right? So if you're using too much of this is not working. If you're using too much of this can't work. So it's this game that we get to play with the body on how to turn it back on so we get out of this pain. Because we're going to have to sit like that for the majority of time because this is what we're doing for work these days. We're online all the time. And then what we have to do is we have to remind the brain to correct it.
Get it corrected.
So then we go back to the sensory receptors. Remember those spindle cell guys? Oh, so isometric contraction, it says explain isometric. So the muscles contract in a different ways, right? Concentric contraction means the muscle is shortening. If you have a concentric contraction, good job, Mike. If this shortens, this is the eccentric side or the lengthening. Isometric is basically where there's contraction without movement. So an isometric would be, let's say if you have a crying baby and the baby is like, you're in the middle of the mall throwing a fit, right? So you're like, hey baby, stop crying.
Hey, baby.
Because that's how I talk to them.
Hey
baby, stop crying. The baby's not crying. So you pick up the baby, that's all concentric. You bring the baby up to you and hug them, and you're holding this child, that is isometric. So it's just like you're holding it, nobody's moving, but you're contracting because you're holding a weight in your hands, but there's no movement. And then once the baby stops crying, then you're going to do the exact opposite movement, which is eccentric, and you're going to load eccentrically and put it back down on the floor or on the ground. And then you're going to go on your merry way. Does that make sense?
Hopefully it was your baby.
Yeah. Hopefully that's helpful. So isometric is just contraction without movement. So when we're dealing with contraction, eccentric, isometric, shortening, lengthening, we are also dealing with those sensory receptors again. Because remember, if I'm sitting here and I'm shortened for a long period of time, the spindle cells, the muscle spindle cells are not getting any activation back here. So their watchdogs they're not talking to the brain anymore because they're like, hey, these guys, they're not sensing any movement. So they're like, we're good. There's no movement needing to happen.
And you're starting to change your position, which is your resting position. Instead of being in a decent posture, there's never a perfect posture, but we always try to get as close as we can because our body works more efficiently.
Right.
If we're staying in that constantly concentric, that contraction this way, it's going to learn to stay in that behavior, and it's going to stay there. Now, the beautiful thing is we can change that and correct that posture, and that we stay in balance.
Right. Well, so here's the thing too, though. is, so let's say that you are really tight here and you do know that this is really where your tight spot is. You have a tendency, and we have a tendency to want to stretch it, right? And so we go up into the door frame, because everybody's got the door frame stretch where they're like pulling on it really quickly. Anytime you do that, you're actually shortening your muscle instead of lengthening it. So what you want to do is, remember, if you have contraction in here and it's shortened and it's chronically short, for you to go up and to do a hardcore stretch like this is actually sending a signal that you're trying to tear your muscle. And so then the body will go and contract even more, because you're alerting the spindle cells on there, like there's some movement, and they're going to contract in even more. So if you guys, in order to change this adaptive behavior that's gone into a smaller ball, let's say, and contractile property, you actually have to think about not just stretching, but contracting from the back. So you're activating the spindle cell, muscle spindle cells in the back, and then the Golgi tendon organs will give a signal back, and then the spindle cells will activate, and then the Golgi tendon will activate, and then it goes back and forth until there's fatigue, and then all of a sudden that's when you're going to get the stretch. So you have to fatigue the fibers out, but that's, as you're doing it, then you're also sending your brain a message like, oh, you really want to pull that shoulder back? I didn't know that you actually needed to do that, because it's forgotten. It's not thinking about that. So, and that's what's going to affect all of your muscle tone. So it's like, if you're sitting like this for a whole long time, that's what your brain knows. And you've created a whole new pattern of movement. And so as you sit down, you see kids, teenagers, right?
I'll tell you about my son. So 14 years old, or just about to turn 14 years old. He is almost 6'2" now. He's getting tall. And when I look into a room and I see him with a bunch of his buddies in his room, in a room, he's sitting in a chair. He is probably the tallest, if not by far the tallest kid in that room, all about the same age. But he looks like he's the shortest because he's sitting completely like this. His back, if you look at his back, it's like a ridge back. It's like the stegosaurus. All the vertebrae are sticking way out. I come up and I push that, I get him up tall. Now all of a sudden he's the tallest kid in the room sitting there. And it's only because he wants to be in this posture for whatever reason in his mind right now.
Right.
And I'm trying to teach him how to get that correct posture back up. And it's just about stabilizing. But it's that if he's learning that behavior, that his body's going to want to stay in that position. Mm-hmm. We're trying to teach him how to get back up and be upright, so he wants to stay in that position, which is much more functional.
Right, and it all starts with the core, right? It all starts with your vertebrae. So your vertebrae is meant to be upright. It's not meant to be all messed up and rounded over. But it counterbalances itself on purpose. So it has like a concave side and a convex side. It's called a lordotic curve and a kyphotic curve, and then a lordotic curve. And that's how we're actually meant to be. Because what it does is it creates a shock absorption, right? And so it reduces the chance of injury by having us upright like that. And so if we spend a lot of time sitting like this, we're absolutely going against all that the body is set up to help us with as far as injury prevention. So a proper posture, it supports your joint and tissues. It optimizes your efficiency and balance. Vanessa, activating the antagonist to stretch the primary mover, neurologically helping the stretch. Yeah. Is that why? Oh, sorry, you gave me a big. Is that why behind static stretching maybe not being the most effective? Static stretching is good. You got to think about when you're doing your static stretching, though. You don't ever want to do static stretching if you're getting ready to do something. Right. Because what it's doing is it's sending a message back to the brain like, oh, we're good for the evening. We're going to calm down. And you're fatiguing your spindle cells. You're fatiguing your muscle fibers because they're going back and forth. They're doing this. So you've got your Golgi tendon and your spindle cells, and they're not fighting, but they're having a conversation back and forth of contraction, 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 contraction. And they're sending it up to the brain. And then finally the brain's like, that's it. Go to your room. And then all of a sudden everything calms down.
Right.
Does that make sense? It activates it. That's why it's reciprocal inhibition. If you're squeezing back here and I'm retracting my shoulder blade, this has to let go. At least a little bit. And that's how we actually start to increase our stretch. Because if I'm focusing back here on moving this can't move at the same time. It can fight you, But this is going to be active because that's what the brain is understanding right now. It's the signal that's being sent to the brain.
I mean, we can go down a whole another topic of doing active or dynamic stretching, static stretching, the whole thing. That's a whole other video in itself.
Yeah.
Or another time in itself. But I think what we're going to focus on right now is getting what's happening here. What's the reason why we're having these pains and this postural pains, and how can we now correct that?
Right.
And make that better.
Right. So let's think about this. Let's go into a pain pattern, right? So we're going to walk through the whole pain pattern. So you're sitting here, right? And you're sitting here like this, and you're looking at your phone or you're looking at your computer, and your movements are your cervical movement, your head goes forward. And so then your thoracic spine, let me see if I can get here. I'm here, my thoracic spine is now overstretching. Right. So now these joints back here, your vertebrae, your shoulder, everything is destabilized. Like their job is to stabilize you and to keep everything up and right so we don't break. Like the whole body is set up so that we don't break, hopefully. And we do a really good job of trying to make it break all the time.
We do.
Because we are human beings are funny individuals. So let's say the joints are now destabilized, right? They become now the weak link in your chain. And we're going to go over kinetic chain at another show. So then what happens there? Pain. So now that you're getting your pain sensation. So your pain receptors are like, what is happening? This is way too much movement. Something is going to happen. We're going to tear.
Damage is going to happen.
Send it to the brain. And so then the brain gets this like, pain sensation. Then all of a sudden now your postural supporters, which are all these muscles in the back, right? They become inhibited, which means they don't do anything. They're suppressed. Like they're like, okay, we're just going to hold here. It's just like they're on freeze. They're like, I'm not going to contract back. I'm just hanging out. Okay. They're just doing that. And they stop working. So then what happens then is like your muscles are like, I don't know what to do. And so what's happening then is now we're recruiting all of the mobility muscles for posture. So now all of the muscles that actually move us are now like, hey, we need you. Your postural guys are not working. I need you to play in. And so they're like, okay, that's not what I do, but okay. So now all of the muscles that are supposed to be moving us forward and back, side to side, are now becoming your postural muscles. And so this is where the shit hits the fan in the body world, right? Because we're hurting, we can't move. And so now all of a sudden we've got our trapezius, which is the upper traps, that is the upper traps. It goes all the way down into a diamond shape. It's now your levator, which is the top of your scapula up into your head in the side of your neck. And your lats, these big latissimus dorsi, they're chronically contracted. So everything's like, it's not really doing its job. It's just sitting there like, okay, just frozen. And it's just holding. And so there becomes now this compensation pattern, right? So now everything else is like compensating because you're sitting like this. So it doesn't know how to do its job anymore because it's a cluster going on up there. And so now your mobility muscles are now functioning as your stabilizers. So now you have no mobility because you're trying to stabilize with all the muscles that are supposed to be doing all the mobility are now doing the other guy's job. And so now what happened? Isometric contraction. We just went over that, right? And so now where you used to have a lot of range of motion and mobility, you've lost it. You don't know how to move it anymore. And so you rapidly fatigue. You get your ischemic and fibers come in. And so there goes your adhesions and your knots. So everything is like, oh, I got these knots. It's not what it is. It's your body is playing compensation rules. And so what that also does, it prevents all of these muscle bellies from being available for movement. So our movement now, our range of motion is where we used to be able to do this. Now we're like, I can't move my shoulders back. It's literally impossible.
It becomes weaker and weaker.
And we see this literally all the time where people, I'm like, move your shoulders. And they're like, what do you mean? I am moving my shoulders. And I'm like, no, you're not. Not moving at all. So now you have this diminished range of motion. And so what happens then is now your muscles are like, that's it. I'm at my breaking point. Done. Your muscles cannot handle it anymore. And they're like, I'm breaking down. And so now you get this huge body breakdown and all of the compensatory patterning. Compensation is when something else is playing for something else. It's like if you're on a sports team and you've got your first string, and your first string are all knocked out, you've gone through your second string, you've gone through your third string, and now you're like over at the water boy. You're like, okay, come in. I know you don't know what you're doing. I need you to work for me.
But ultimately, what is this playing on? It's playing on your joint.
Right.
And this is what's going to be a big cause of leading to degenerative joints in our body. Shoulders, back, knees, hips, all of them are coming on because of these compensatory patterns.
Right. And then your brain is like, I don't know what the hell is happening. I'm just playing because you guys are sending me weird signals all the time. Because your brain's like, all right, I'm checking out. Bye-bye. And so it just leaves the party. It really does, because it doesn't understand the party that's going on. And so what comes of this? So here's the big thing. How do we fix this and get out of pain?
All it comes back to is to functional movement, restoring the function or the position of our body back to where it should be, whatever that might be. And that's different for everybody. It's roughly about the same for everybody, but it can be different for every person.
Sure.
And within a few degrees or whatever.
Right. It's really about, you guys, focusing on what your body feels like when it's moving. Yeah. Because just trying to think this muscle to go this way, you're doing all sorts of other stuff subconsciously because you've already set up that pattern. Because you're sitting like this all the time. So now I'm like, I'm going to pull my shoulders back.
And
you're really not pulling your shoulders back at all. You're extending your spine.
Your shoulders move back, but not because of your active muscles moving back.
Totally. So reciprocal inhibition comes back into play. Think about the muscle that is closest to the joint that you want to work and contract those. Put your fingers on the body that you're working and feel the shoulder being pulled back. Don't think about arching. Think about pulling your shoulders back and just hold it. So now you're going to give yourself an isometric contraction, which means you're going to hold your contraction for 5 or 10 seconds, and you're going to let your brain show back up to the party. Your brain's been sitting in 7-Eleven getting snacks for the quarantine for the last who knows. Ooh. So let it show up to the party, and as soon as it shows back up, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's what you wanted? Yeah. Okay. And so then it starts talking back into it. So then all of a sudden that pain that you were feeling up here will start to go away. The knots go away. The fibrotic tissue goes away. The ischemia goes away. The pecs actually open up and get a little softer and stop feeling like, your headache will go down. Your head will actually come back. You'll not look like the Hunchback of Notre Dame, but you'll actually look like a normal human again. There's so many things that you can do for yourself, but it takes connecting into your body, right?
Absolutely.
So think about that. If you guys have any questions on how to do this, feel free to ask us.
Is there something we can show them right now that can help just start to restore some of this?
I think the biggest thing is really, as I want you guys to think about your shoulder blades as being the prime mover. So I want you to, your shoulder blades is the bone in your back, right? Those little wings have 17 muscles attached to them. 17. Wow. And one big one is right here. It's called your pec minor, and it actually pulls your shoulder down and in. So we want to actually retract that shoulder by the muscles that are attached to that shoulder blade. So think about using the shoulder blade and dropping the shoulder blade down, pulling the shoulder blade back.
A big thing is a lot of people tend to do that and actually elevate. You'll actually see the shoulder, I'm pulling it back and down. And the shoulder actually elevates up and goes forward.
Yeah.
Instead of back and down.
Yeah. So try just those two things. And I want you to hold it. Hold it. Play a game with yourself and hold it for 10 to 15 seconds.
Think about, this is one you gotta learn from you. Put your armpit in your back pocket. Think about that motion. Armpit in the back pocket.
Yeah.
Whether we have back pockets or not. You got your yoga pants on, whatever you're doing. Put your armpit in the back pocket. It's a guiding motion.
Yeah, it's a good visual for you. So if you think about doing that, and hold it, you'll start to actually feel these muscles come back.
Should they contract real hard?
No, just a little bit.
No.
Don't let your rest of your body change. All you're doing is trying to get this to happen. It's not this happening. You're not going into like a contortion. You're just contracting your shoulder. So I hope this was really helpful for you. And I really want you guys to be out of pain, and we really want you to be out of pain. Absolutely. And we really want you to understand how amazing the human body is and how amazing your body is.
You are totally
It really is so, so cool. And the more you understand it, the more empowered you get. And the little things, the little movements make the big movements so much easier.
Absolutely.
And that is the key to getting out of pain. It starts with the little movements. So think about connecting with your body, and that way you'll be able to do bigger things and hold that contraction. And then all of that pain will start to go away. So if this is helpful, please let us know, give us comments. We're also going to be sharing with that Facebook page, the Tissue Talk Facebook page, we're going to be sharing a couple of different exercises for how to open up your hips and how to open up your pecs, both partner and single. So hopefully you guys found this great, and we will see you next Wednesday. And we're going to go over low back and hip dysfunction.
Oh,
yay!
My favorite.
Since we're sitting all the time. So if you guys have any questions and if you've got anything that you want us to go over, we're totally down to do it. So I hope you guys had a great day. Enjoy your Wednesday, and we will see you next week. Bye!
Woo!